Have you ever wondered what happens in the moment an ordinary man steps into a room that will decide the fate of an entire faith? In the Vatican, there's a place called the Room of Tears, not because of sadness, but because of the trembling awe that comes with facing eternity. That day, when the heavy wooden door closed behind Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, the world outside buzzed with the sound of bells, chants, and camera flashes. But inside, there was only silence. A sacred silence, almost tangible. The room was simple yet solemn. A wooden crucifix hung on the wall, Christ's gaze falling on 3 shimmering white vestments laid out on a velvet-draped table. They weren't just garments. They were symbols of power, tradition, and centuries of grandeur. The golden threads, stitched by skilled hands, seemed to wait eagerly to transform a man into an icon. But Robert, or now Pope Leo XIV, didn't look at them. His eyes settled on a dusty corner, where an old, tattered canvas bag sat, worn by time. That bag didn't belong in this room. It was a relic from his days as a young priest, wandering through the poor alleys of Peru, where the scent of earth, salt, and sacrifice clung to every fiber. When he asked, his voice a low whisper, "Is it still there?" The room fell even quieter. A young aide stepped forward, opened the bag, and pulled out a coarse brown robe. No gold, no silk, just the faint stains of dried mud and memories of the mountain trails he once walked. Leo took it, pressed it to his chest, like embracing an old friend. "This is what I want," he said. In that moment, no one dared to speak. The master of ceremonies, an older man whose hands were used to holding ornate vestments, bowed his head in confusion. A cardinal in the background whispered, "But Holy Father, the tradition." Leo raised his hand, not in anger, but with a calm authority. "Tradition lives in the heart," he replied. "And today we must remind the world what our church truly is." Picture this: a man, just chosen to lead over 1 billion faithful, standing before a mirror, not in a golden robe, but holding a worn, brown garment. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a traveler, a servant. And when he stepped out onto the balcony of St. Peter's Square, it wasn't the gleam of gold that stunned the crowd, it was the heartbreaking simplicity of that robe. The bells stopped ringing. The applause hesitated. Then a sob broke out from somewhere in the crowd. A young mother knelt. A child cried. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone felt it. History had just shifted. What drives a man to reject a crown for the dust of the road? How can a simple brown robe shake the very foundations of the Vatican? This story isn't just about a pope. It's about a church at a crossroads, between power and mercy, between tradition and truth. Leo XIV didn't just step onto that balcony that day. He stepped into the hearts of millions, and at the same time, into the eye of a storm of forces determined to keep things as they were. Let's dive deeper into this journey together. We'll see how one man with trembling hands and a heart full of love rattled the stone walls of the Vatican. But first, hold on to that image of him standing before the mirror, smiling, not out of triumph, but out of peace. The peace of a man who knew he was on the right path, even if that path was lined with thorns. Imagine St. Peter's Square on a rainy evening. The crowds have dispersed, and the Vatican lights fade into the mist. But in a shadowy corner near the city gates, a lone figure walks quietly. No armored car, no Swiss Guard escort, just a brown robe fluttering in the wind. That was Pope Leo XIII, the man the world had just seen on the balcony, now blending into the darkness like an anonymous stranger. He wasn't walking to be seen. He walked because he believed Jesus walked this way, not on red carpets, but on dusty roads. That night, he stopped beside a homeless boy, his hands bandaged, his cheeks marked with bruises. No words were spoken at first. Leo simply sat down, shoulder to shoulder, and gave the boy the wooden cross he wore around his neck. The boy didn't cry or ask for anything. He just held the cross tightly, as if it were the first warmth he'd ever felt. These walks weren't on the Vatican schedule. They sent officials into a panic and left media teams scrambling for explanations. But for Leo, they were his breath. He visited prisons where inmates eyed him with suspicion until he sat down and asked their names. He went to hospitals, holding the hands of AIDS patients abandoned by their families. He walked through slums where children ran after him, not because he was the Pope, but because he was the only one who stopped to listen. Each step he took was a declaration, not in words, but in actions. In the Vatican, where portraits of popes in lavish robes line the halls, Leo passed like a shadow, his brown robe outshining the golden vestments in the paintings. A young cardinal once whispered to a colleague, "He looks like a monk, not a pope." The other replied, "Maybe that's the point." But not everyone saw the point. In the closed rooms of the Holy See, an unsigned memorandum began to circulate. It didn't openly criticize Leo, but the questions it raised were sharp as knives. Was a pope who rejected tradition weakening the church? Was this humility just a populist act? Some cardinals started meeting in secret, discussing how to rein him in, to keep him within bounds. They didn't want to overthrow him. They just wanted the church to remain the church they knew, with its rituals, power, and order. Meanwhile, in far-off places, Leo's story spread like wildfire. In Trujillo, Peru, where he'd once been a priest, people gathered around an old TV, watching him in his brown robe. A woman held up a faded photo of a young Leo beside a donkey carrying medical supplies. "He never left us," she said, tears streaming down her face. Children lit candles, and a mural began to take shape on the church wall, inscribed with the words, "León de Dios, el Papa Humilde," Lion of God, the humble Pope. Leo didn't stop. He ordered a full audit of the Vatican's finances, opening ghost accounts and redirecting funds to missions in the poorest regions. He refused to live in the Apostolic Palace, choosing a small room in the Domus Sanctae Marthae, where he brewed his own coffee and ate breakfast with the staff. One morning, when a janitor saw him fumbling in the dining room, he just laughed and said, "No ceremonies before coffee, all right?" But what truly shook the world was his action on Pentecost. Before thousands, he didn't emerge from the balcony, but from the crowd, standing among the disabled migrants and nuns in faded habits. He stood on a low wooden platform, no microphone, no stage lights, and said, "We've made this church too heavy, too full of gold, too far from the poor." Then he removed his white papal skull cap, the symbol of his authority, and placed it at the feet of a man with leprosy. "Here," he said, "is the authority of Christ." That moment wasn't just a gesture. It was a crack in the stone, a call for the church to look at itself. But would that crack let in light or lead to collapse? Let's continue this journey together, to see how a man in worn shoes made the whole world stop and listen. When the first candle was lit in St. Peter's Square after Pentecost, no one could have known that millions more would light up across the world. The image of Pope Leo XIV kneeling before a man with leprosy, placing his white skull cap on the ground, transcended borders. It wasn't just on TV screens or social media. It etched itself into the hearts of those who'd forgotten the church was once their home. In a small village in Rwanda, survivors of violence gathered in a simple chapel. The priest held up a photo of Leo in his brown robe and said, "We've been seen." In Manila, a group of young people organized a foot-washing ceremony for migrant workers. No press, no fame. In Brazil, a nun wrote on the convent wall, "We want to remember what power should look like." These small acts, quiet but powerful, were like pebbles rippling across a still lake. But in the marble corridors of the Vatican, it wasn't candles, but shadows that were growing. The unsigned memorandum was no longer a whisper. It had been rewritten, sharper now, with questions that no longer hid. Could a pope who refused to rule still be a pope? Was he turning Peter's throne into a stage? Some cardinals began to align, not to overthrow, but to protect the church from what they called chaos. One said coldly, "He's not governing, he's dismantling." Leo knew about the meetings. He read the memorandum, placed it under his prayer journal, and didn't respond. Instead, he kept walking. One rainy evening, he sat beside a homeless man under the stone columns of St. Peter's Square. The man laughed hoarsely, saying, "You're making the church look like Jesus again?" Leo just smiled, letting the rain soak his robe. He didn't need affirmation, he needed presence. Letters started arriving, not from bishops or donors, but from ordinary people. A widow in Chile wrote, "Seeing you kneel, I knew I could return to church." A prisoner in Argentina asked, "Does God still love me?" Leo replied with 3 sentences. "God never stopped. He's been waiting in your cell. Let him in." These letters, alongside the criticisms, were kept in his drawer, which he called prayers. The Feast of Saints. Peter and Paul arrived, and once again, Leo defied expectations. He canceled the coronation, refused the throne. Instead, he celebrated Mass in the middle of the square, on a simple wooden altar, with no barriers, no pomp. He said, "The gospel isn't a throne, it's a towel." Then he stepped down, hugged a disabled man, kissed a child's forehead, held a weeping woman's hand. The crowd didn't clap. They began to follow, not in a parade, but as people who'd rediscovered a forgotten path. In the apostolic palace, a cardinal left a note. He removed the crown, and I saw Christ again. But not everyone saw the light. Some called him dangerous. Others whispered of consequences. A new document, still unsigned, began to circulate, questioning not just Leo's style, but his very ability to lead. Leo's story doesn't end here, and perhaps it never will. A man in a brown robe, with worn shoes and a fearless heart, did what few dared. He reminded the world that the church isn't a palace, but footsteps in the dust. But he left us with a question. Do we have the courage to follow? Or will we stand still, afraid of the light he ignited? If this story moved you, share it. Let me know what you think of the man who chose a towel over a throne, and let's keep searching for answers together, not in gold or silver, but in the candles that still burn in the darkness.